I'm about to take you on a journey to learn to think, walk, and talk like a driving test examiner. This video is going to have 3 parts. Part 1, how to impress the driving test examiner and use my experience of taking hundreds of students to the driving test. What are my biggest driving test tips? The second part is driving test tips directly from the horse's mouth, the horse's mouth being the driving test examiner. And part 3, are driving test examiners the enemy? What's the general consensus? How do people think about the driving test and driving test examiners? And let our journey begin. How do we impress the driving test examiner? And the first thing we really need to understand here is it doesn't matter how much we impress that driving test examiner. If we make a mistake that is deemed a serious fault, you cannot impress your way through that. Every single examiner on the planet is going to put the driving test as a fail. A serious fault is going to equal
game over.
There is no way of impressing yourself through a serious or dangerous fault. However, for everything else, there's MasterCard. No, but seriously, for everything else that's on the fence, this is what's going to help. And when I say on the fence, you've heard about those situations where one person failed for going 33 in a 30 zone and another person passed for going 36 in a 30 zone. They're on the fence. But for this, we're going to have to put ourselves back in the examiner's shoes. So we're the driving test examiner. We walk out and we meet Sam. Sam's here for his driving test. Now, are you going to make an initial judgment on what Sam's wearing, how he looks, how he smells? I would, damn straight, and so would 99% of the population. Because it doesn't matter what anyone tells you, we are human and we do judge books by their cover. Now think about anything else in the world that you want to take seriously. Job interview, date, going out for a meal. How do you dress? You dress to impress. Why? Well, 1, you want to impress them, and 2, you want to feel confident. You feel better when you dress nicely. And I'm not talking about a shirt and tie, I'm just talking about smart casual, not in your paint clothes. So if you dress for the occasion, you are going to feel more confident and you're going to give a better impression to the driving test examiner, which are 2 things that he wants. You're also going to help your nerves and everything else if you turn your phone off. You're going to feel better. Imagine if your mate Billy starts calling you, thinks it's funny on your driving test, hey! So make sure your phone's on silent at least. And the final one is while you're at the test centre, make sure you got your licence out ready. You know, when the examiner comes out, it doesn't want to have to wait another 3 minutes while you dig through your handbag to find your licence or dig it through your wallet. Have it in your hand. They want to get back and have a cup of tea as much as you want to get back and tell everyone you passed your test. Also remember, if you're going in your own car, the examiner is going to need a central mirror. So if you haven't got one, try and tell the examiner when they come out, so at least they can pop in and go and get the spare. Ideally, bring one yourself, in case every single person there hasn't got a central mirror. That'd be sad. And lots of people don't realise that it's okay to have the radio on. If you want the radio on, have the radio on. If you don't want the radio on, don't have the radio on. If it's going to keep you chilled in the zone, man, have the radio on. Around 80% of my students do have the radio on their driving test. And why the hell not? I mean, will you have the radio on if you pass? Most of us. Isn't music supposed to help us keep relaxed? Does it fill those empty spaces up in conversation and YouTube videos when you've left the gaps in the video too big? Another massive hoo-ha that people have around the driving test examiner is to talk or not to talk. Should you talk to the driving test examiner on your driving test? Well, the biggest thing I'd say is don't worry about it, because it really doesn't matter either way. But generally, for most people, I'd say no, don't try and talk. But I say that because I can't multitask. And I know any time I drive and try and speak, my driving goes to hoo-ha, which always happens to be when my wife's in the friggin' passenger seat. And then she starts telling me, the driving instructor, how to drive. Let me tell you, that's a fun domestic. No, but seriously, it doesn't matter if you talk to the driving test examiner or not. What really matters is, can you actually talk while driving without making a mistake? Because from my experience, it's very difficult. When I'm talking to students on roundabouts or whatever, they end up making a mistake. And I know I personally am far worse when I'm talking to someone as well. Now, I will tell you a quick story about this. My brother had 3 driving tests. Okay, he failed his first 2 driving tests. And we had a chat about it. And I said, you know, what happened? Why did you fail? And he said he failed because he was so focused on trying to sweet talk the examiner that he kept losing focus and making mistakes when he was driving. So on his 3rd attempt, he stopped trying to speak to the examiner and just focused on the road because, like me, he is very one-track minded. He cannot multitask. And sure enough, he passed. The second example of this, I was sitting in the back of a test recently with a guy called Seppo, and the examiner Chris, he loves to talk. Chatty, chatty, chatty McChatface. Shut up, Chris. No, but seriously, he does love a chat. Really, really nice guy. But Teppo was not the most confident person for a driving test. So Teppo had it in his head he was not going to speak because he knew if he started talking, he would definitely make mistakes. So anytime the examiner spoke, he just sort of one-word answer and at the end of the test, Chris said, well, you didn't want to speak to me, did you? He says, but you passed your driving test, well done. So just to give you an example, this is the examiner that doesn't shut up. He wants to talk constantly, but it doesn't matter if you don't speak to them, you're still going to pass. What's really important out there is that you don't mess up because you were talking. And remember, you're never actually going to see this examiner again, ever. So you don't need to try and be best friends with them. They've got plenty of friends at home, but you should always be polite. So what are the most important things on the driving test? Your most important job on that driving test is to keep that person as comfortable as possible. If you were sitting in that seat there and the person driving here almost clipped the corner of that car, would you be inclined to go giving them a license? I'm not so sure. The way you need to think about the driving test is you are a chauffeur. You are not a taxi. Taxis try and get people from A to B as quickly as possible because they need to get to their next job. Chauffeurs try and get people from A to B as comfortably as possible. Taxis are fast, chauffeurs are comfortable. And what do you want to do with that examiner? You want to keep them comfortable. So don't focus on speed, focus on comfort. Another thing to remember is the examiner is not psychic, okay? They can only see what you do. They can only judge from what you actually do or what you say. So if something unusual happens, communicate it. If you're pulling out a junction and someone starts flashing you to go, say, they flashed me, so I'm gonna go. Because I can promise you, if the examiner's just tapping away or lost attention and you start pulling out for a second, there's a car coming and they haven't seen them flash, they could very well slam their brakes on, and it doesn't matter what you say at that point, it's game over. Whereas if you drag their attention to the fact that someone's flashed you, they're not gonna panic. And I only say this from experience because occasionally it does happen. We all make mistakes. And the same goes if you miss a turning on the sat-nav. Sat-nav says turn left, you miss it, or it's too late. You didn't do it in time, you thought it was safer to carry on. Say, I've missed a turning, can you redirect? Just own it, okay? Because if you don't, then, how does that look? They're thinking, does this guy know that he's just missed the turning? I have so many more tips like this and information about the driving test and how to prepare for the driving test. If you want to have a look in the driving course, top description now, or description there or somewhere, have a look at the driving course anyway. There is so much there for you. Okay, so I had a chat with the driving test examiner who's been doing the job for 15 years. And they gave me their three biggest tips. Here we go. Now, their number one biggest tip is do not get distracted by the examiner. I can give you some great examples of this one. A student of mine, Chris, he goes for his driving test. He comes back, stand there, examiner says, unfortunately, Chris, you're unsuccessful. He says, Chris, do you know why you're unsuccessful? Chris says, no. He says, because you kept looking down at the gear stick and your car's going wonky. I'm like, what? Chris never looks at the gear stick. What's wrong with this guy? So I say, all right, cheers, Ian. So I say, Chris, what the hell was that? Why have you suddenly started looking at the gear stick, He said, Josh, I wasn't looking at the gear stick. He said, I kept looking across at what the examiner was tapping on the tablet. Now, there's a couple of problems there. First of all, the tablets have like an anti-glare film on, so no one can actually read what is going on the tablet from the side unless you're looking at it square on. So you're completely wasting your time by trying to look at the tablet. The second thing that people often aren't aware of is why they're pressing these buttons. People think it's because they're getting a fault for every time the examiner presses a button. You're not. The examiner has to press a button every time you do something on the driving test. Such as every time the examiner asks you to pull over, which is anywhere between 3 and 5 times, the examiner is going to press something on the iPad to say, yes, we've pulled over. It's a tick sheet. They have to tick each thing for the driving test. When they ask you to do your maneuver, they're going to tick it to say, yes, we've done that. They're going to tick it for the show me, tell me question. And if they do tick it a few extra times for a few minor faults, you can get up to 15 faults and still pass your driving test. Don't let them distract you. Focus on the drive ahead. Now, the second tip, I feel like a broken record saying this, honestly, but the evidence is just there. Practice makes perfect. As Gary Player says, the more I practice, the luckier I get. And I, my friends, I'm a very lucky person. So think about that for a second. When your friend says, I was really lucky I passed my driving test first time, were they really lucky, or have they just had a lot more practice than you have? And then think about your driving lessons for a second. Like, what are they actually for? Driving lessons are just for making as many mistakes as you can on the road in a controlled environment. Because each time you make a mistake, your brain says, oh, I probably shouldn't do that one again. The problem is when these mistakes happen on your driving test and you haven't experienced it in your driving lessons, that's when it goes So this is why I always say to students, if you have the opportunity for someone in your family to take you driving alongside your driving lessons, snap it up. Don't listen to anyone that starts talking to you about bad habits. Oh, mum and dad will give me bad habits. So what? Mum and dad can also give you 40 plus free hours of driving experience on the roads. Can a driving examiner do that for free? No. How long does it take a driving examiner to fix bad habits? Anywhere between what? A couple of hours? 3 hours? Point being, it's a lot easier to fix bad habits than trying to get 40 hours experience for free that you can get from mum and dad. And the third and final tip was about the driving test nerves. And the examiner said that half of driving test nerves comes from confidence. So if we can eliminate half of that, you're halfway home. And who doesn't want to be halfway home? Point being, if you can eliminate the nervousness because you don't feel confident on the road, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier to pass your driving test. And a lot of what the examiner is talking about here is being independent. Being able to drive and being an independent driver is slightly different. If you can drive with your instructor, giving you slight helpful hints and telling you left, right, great. But can you drive independently, take us to Sainsbury's on your own without any support at all? That's when you're independent. That's when you're going to be confident, and that's when you're test ready. Another thing to remember is on your driving test, it's going to be a maximum of 40 minutes, and that's probably 30 minutes driving. So the examiner's not ever going to take you any further than 15 minutes from the driving test centre. Which means if you can practice a 15-minute vicinity roughly around the driving test centre, your life is going to be a hell of a lot easier. You're also going to feel a lot more confident if you practice at the same time as your driving test. You've got a test at 8 AM, school traffic, people getting to work. You need to be practicing at 8 AM. There's no point doing every single driving lesson at 10 AM when things are nice and quiet and chilled, man, and suddenly you've got a driving test at 8 AM. There's traffic driving people absolutely everywhere. That's going to be what I like to call a shit show. It would also massively help if you knew some of the danger zones. This is particularly important if you're going and doing a test somewhere else, in another test centre, because we know how busy it is at the moment. If you're deciding that you want to go and do a test in Wolverhampton and you live an hour away, it would be a really good idea if you jumped on YouTube and searched danger zones in Wolverhampton, or get a couple of driving lessons and just say to the instructor, can you take me to the hardest areas of Wolverhampton? That is by far going to give you the best possible chance of passing your test first time, instead of just going in there blindly, hoping for the best, having to rebook a test and doing it all again anyway. And if you're wondering what I mean about danger zones, everywhere has zones which students generally miss. Okay, maybe it's nerves, maybe it's just because they're quite difficult areas to learn. I know in Stoke, for instance, there's 2 giveaway signs that many a student will miss. If I take them there for the first time, if they haven't practiced it, they're going to end up missing them. Why? Because it's over signposted, or the road looks like it's straight. Not an excuse, but always happens. I also know that the roundabouts in Newcastle are going to be particularly difficult because there's 5 roundabouts and they're all completely different. The road markings aren't fantastic. Someone's going to very easily make a mistake if they haven't had a little bit of experience on them. Now, you're going to have these at every area in the country. You also want to make sure you familiarise yourself with the car. If you're suddenly using a different car for your driving test, remember you're going to be asked a show me, tell me question, so you're going to want to know those basic 7 questions. But on top of that, imagine if it rains and you don't know how to use the window wipers. That's going to be a problem. Those are stresses that you just don't need. And they're very avoidable by just spending 5 minutes and learning the car. And the final one is, again, put yourself in the driving examiner's perspective, okay? You're the driving examiner, student comes out, start speaking to you, you ask them a tell me question. There's 14 questions and they can't answer it. What are you thinking? Are you thinking this person's come in prepared?
You are not prepared.
They are ready. Or are you thinking, oh God, here's another one, give me strength. I mean, why wouldn't you be able to answer a tell me question? So do yourself a favour and just make sure you revise them. There's 14 questions, they're pretty easy, they're self-explanatory. If you're not sure of any, ask the driving test instructor. If you don't get it right, it's not the end of the world. It's not going to fail your driving test, but it's not going to look great. So if this has helped so far, if you want the A to Z of how to pass your driving test and you want this in a written format, have a look at my online course in the link there or in the description below, might even be in the comments. But yeah, it's got everything you need to pass your driving test. Now, driving test examiners get a hell of a lot of grief. Why? Because this is a really emotional, stressful situation. This could easily be in your top 10 most stressful events in your life. You might have spent anywhere between £1,000 and £3,000 learning to drive. You've probably put between 30 and 70 hours in. There's a massive emotional drain that comes with learning to drive. I know, I see it every single lesson. And you get to the test for this final big reward of freedom. They're releasing you from your prison. You're getting out into the world. You can do whatever you want. And the only thing stopping you getting there is that driving examiner. It is still a very emotional and stressful situation. So what we're going to do now is we're going to try and turn this whole situation upside down and think about it from a driving test examiner's perspective. Now imagine for a second, you are the driving test examiner. You meet someone who's arrived to take the driving test. Now when you meet that person, are you expecting them to be able to drive? Are you expecting them to be able to drive independently on the roads on their own? Of course you are. That's why they've come for the driving test. So at the moment, you're giving them 100 out of 100 marks. They've got 100%. They can drive perfectly. Boom, easy. All they have to do is keep those 100 marks. Don't go giving marks away doing dumb stuff. So try and think about the driving test like an ice cold glass of milk. The glass isn't half empty. The glass isn't half full. The glass is full to the friggin' brim. Just don't spill the milk. So I had a student the other day, Luke, turned up to the driving test. He is really nervous, okay? He's on edge. I know everyone's nervous, but Luke was sweating, nervous. And we had to sit there and we had to have a chat and a bit of a reminder about the driving examiner. And who are they? What are they? Are they some sort of deity, god in the world? No, driving test examiners are just normal people. Normal people like you, like me. They have families, they have children, they have a dog that they walk every morning and afternoon. They work 8 till 4, some of them love their job, some of them absolutely hate their job. They drive home at 4, they go have their tea, and then the next day starts again. So treat them that way. They're on the same level as you. Every time I go for a driving test, I have a chat with one of the examiners. And they all have their own interests. Last week I went and had a chat with Carl. Carl always turns up in a nice shiny purple Audi with metallic paint. Absolutely stunning. So what does Carl love talking about? Yeah, he loves talking about his Audi. I don't blame him, I'd like to talk about that Audi as well. Now I know that Ian, the examiner, loves playing football. So what does Ian love to talk about? You guessed it, cricket. No, wait a minute. Anyway, I know it's hard to remember, but they are just normal people, so try and treat them that way. Because I can promise you, if you start putting them as some sort of special person on a pedestal, that's going to play some real mind games when you're trying to drive around on your driving test with them. Now, last year was an amazing year. It was the first year of having my online driving course for a full year, and it was genuinely heartwarming to hear some of the stories from the people that have used my online driving course and actually passed their driving test with just the course and practice at home alone. And I am going to start recording some of these stories for you so you can actually hear them from the horse's mouth. If anyone out there, by the way, has used my online driving course and is helping with your driving test, let me know in the comments below. If you haven't seen my online driving course, it's going to be there or in the description below. It's got everything you actually need, including what we're talking about now for the driving test in the UK. If you're binge watching videos before your driving test that is coming up, here are 2 videos worth watching. One is similar to this one from last year. The other one is how to prepare for your driving test, which is just here. Both fantastic information. Have a look at those. It's been a pleasure. I am Josh, the driving instructor, and I'll see you all soon. Boom!